The Second World War, a cataclysm that reshaped the very fabric of global power, was a crucible that forged and tested military commanders of extraordinary talent on both sides of the titanic struggle. Among the Axis powers and the Allied forces, leaders emerged whose lives became tapestries woven with threads of brilliant success, staggering audacity, and, at times, catastrophic failure. Their names, Rommel, Guderian, Zhukov, Patton, Montgomery, have echoed through the halls of history, each a symbol of strategic prowess and battlefield command. Yet among this pantheon of military titans, one name particularly within the German Wehrmacht is often elevated above all others, a figure whose strategic acumen was considered by many to be unparalleled, Erich von Manstein. Born Fritz Erich Georg Eduard von Lewinsky on November 24, 1887, and later adopting the name of his foster father to become Erich von Manstein, he was a senior field marshal in the German army whose career spanned the tumultuous first half of the 20th century. The renowned British military historian and strategist, Sir B.H. Liddell Hart, a man who interviewed dozens of Germany's top generals after the war, unequivocally declared Manstein to be the most brilliant and capable military mind of the entire German officer corps. To the soldiers and junior officers who served under his command, he was more than a genius, he was the unbesiegbare Feldherr, the unbeatable general. His reputation was built on a foundation of audacious planning, a masterful understanding of operational art, and an almost intuitive grasp of battlefield dynamics. Prepared to journey back to the war-torn landscapes of the 1940s to witness the unfolding of a strategic mind that both engineered some of the Third Reich's most stunning triumphs and grappled with its inevitable, self-inflicted demise. This is the story of Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, the man whose intellect was both the Wehrmacht's sharpest weapon and a force ultimately constrained by the very regime it served. The architect of victory in the West. Erich von Manstein's ascent to the pinnacle of military fame began in earnest with the German invasion of Western Europe in the spring of 1940. While he was not a household name at the time, his influence behind the scenes was about to irrevocably alter the course of the war. As Chief of Staff to General Gerd von Rundstedt's Army Group A, Manstein became the principal architect of the revolutionary operational plan for the invasion of France and the Low Countries, a plan that would become known as Fall Gelb, Case Yellow. The initial plan, developed by the German High Command, OKH, was a rather conventional and uninspired repeat of the Schlieffen Plan from World War I. It called for the main German thrust to be delivered by Army Group B through central Belgium and the Netherlands. Manstein viewed this strategy with deep professional contempt. He argued that it was predictable and would likely lead to a head-on collision with the best Allied forces, resulting in a bloody war of attrition with, at best, a partial victory. He believed that merely seizing the Channel coast would not be decisive and would mire Germany in a protracted conflict it could ill afford. Driven by this conviction, Manstein developed an alternative that was breathtaking in its audacity and operational elegance. His plan, which he tirelessly championed against stiff opposition from the High Command, was a masterpiece of strategic misdirection. The core of his idea was to make the attack through the north, via Army Group B, a massive feint. This powerful but secondary attack would storm into the Netherlands and northern Belgium, drawing the elite of the French army and the entire British Expeditionary Force, BEF, northward to meet it, just as the original OKH plan intended, and just as the Allies expected. The true masterstroke, however, was the main event. A sudden, overwhelming armored assault by the panzer divisions of Army Group A through the seemingly impassable terrain of the Ardennes forest in southern Belgium and Luxembourg. Allied military doctrine, particularly that of the French, considered the dense, hilly, and winding roads of the Ardennes to be completely unsuitable for a major mechanized offensive. They believed it was a natural barrier, a tank-proof region, and consequently left it defended by only second-rate and reserve divisions. Manstein's plan exploited this crucial underestimation.
He envisioned a massive concentration of armor, a Panzerschwerpunkt, that would punch through the weak Allied screen in the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and then race deep into the heart of France. From there, the panzer spearheads would not drive towards Paris, but would instead execute a dramatic wheeling maneuver to the northwest, driving for the English Channel coast. This Sickle Cut, or Sickle Schnitt, would sever the supply lines and encircle the entire northern wing of the Allied armies, the very forces that had rushed into Belgium to counter the German feint. They would be trapped, with their backs to the sea and the German pincers closing around them. The plan was fraught with risk. The panzer columns would be advancing with long, exposed flanks, vulnerable to counterattack. The logistics of supplying such a rapid advance through difficult terrain were a nightmare. For months, the German High Command, particularly its commander-in-chief, General Franz Halder, dismissed Manstein's proposal as reckless and irresponsible. Frustrated by the institutional intransigence, Manstein, through a series of fortuitous connections, managed to have his plan brought directly to the attention of Adolf Hitler. Hitler, with his own penchant for the unconventional and the bold, was immediately captivated. He recognized the plan's potential for a swift, decisive victory, and, overriding the objections of his more cautious generals, enthusiastically approved it. The Manstein plan became the new blueprint for the invasion. The results were more spectacular than even Manstein could have hoped. When the offensive launched on May 10, 1940, everything unfolded as he had predicted. The Allies took the bait, rushing their best armies into Belgium. Meanwhile, the panzer divisions of Army Group A, under generals like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel, surged through the Ardennes, brushed aside the light French defenses, and crossed the Meuse River. The subsequent drive to the Channel was shockingly fast. Within 10 days, German tanks had reached the coast at Abbeville, cutting off the BEF, the French First Army, and the Belgian Army. The Allied command structure was paralyzed by shock and disbelief. The campaign in the West, which many had expected to last for months or even years, was effectively decided in a matter of weeks. France fell, and the British were forced into a desperate last-ditch evacuation from the beaches of Dunkirk. For his visionary role in this historic victory, Manstein was promoted to the rank of General of the Infantry and awarded the Knight Cross of the Iron Cross, one of the Reich's highest military honors. He had proven himself to be a strategist of the first order, a man whose intellectual courage had delivered a victory of unparalleled speed and efficiency while all minimizing German casualties.
The Eastern Front, a new kind of war. Following his triumph in the West, Manstein was transferred to the cauldron of the Eastern Front to participate in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, which began in June 1941. He was given command of the 56th Panzer Corps, part of Army Group North, tasked with advancing towards Leningrad. His performance in the opening phase of the campaign was nothing short of brilliant. In the first 4 days of the invasion, Manstein's corps executed a stunning deep penetration, covering an astonishing 200 miles or 315 kilometers to seize a vital bridgehead over the Dwina River at Daugavpils. This rapid advance, a textbook example of the blitzkrieg concept he had helped pioneer, completely unhinged the Soviet defensive front in the Baltic region. However, this very success created its own dangers. His Panzer Corps had advanced so rapidly that it had become a long, thin spearhead, dangerously detached from the slower-moving infantry divisions of the main army. With his flanks exposed and his supply lines stretched to the breaking point, Manstein found his corps subjected to a series of ferocious and relentless counterattacks by numerically superior Soviet forces. For weeks, he conducted a masterful mobile defense, skillfully maneuvering his outnumbered panzers to defeat one Soviet thrust after another, preserving his corps and its crucial gains against overwhelming odds. This defensive battle was as impressive as his initial offensive drive, showcasing his versatility and coolness under extreme pressure. Later in 1941, Manstein was given a new, more significant command, the 11th Army, part of Army Group South, with the mission of conquering the Crimean Peninsula. The centerpiece of this campaign was the formidable fortress city of Sevastopol, the heavily fortified home of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. The siege of Sevastopol would become one of the most brutal and hard-fought battles of the entire war. For over 250 days, Manstein's 11th Army, a combined force of Romanian and German troops, lay siege to a city defended with fanatical determination by the Soviet Independent Coastal Army and Marines of the Black Sea Fleet. The Soviets were well entrenched in a vast network of concrete and steel fortifications, supported by massive coastal artillery batteries, including the legendary Maxim Gorky 1 battery with its 305mm naval guns. Manstein meticulously planned the assault. He brought in the heaviest artillery pieces in the German arsenal, including the colossal 800mm Dora railway gun and massive 600mm siege mortars to systematically pulverize the Soviet defenses. After months of relentless bombardment and bloody inch-by-inch infantry assaults through a labyrinth of forts and pillboxes, the city finally fell in July 1942. The conquest of Crimea was a major strategic victory, securing the south flank of the German armies driving towards the Caucasus. The battle, however, came at a high cost, with the 11th Army suffering heavy casualties. In recognition of this hard-won victory, a grateful Hitler promoted Manstein directly to the rank of Field Marshal. His reputation on the Eastern Front was sealed. To the Soviets, he was now a primary antagonist, a commander whose name was spoken with a mixture of hatred and respect. Soviet Marshal Kirill Meretskov would later describe Manstein as a cunning, resourceful, and dangerous enemy, an assessment echoed in the memoirs of many Soviet generals who faced him. He was seen as second only to Hitler in the hierarchy of Germany's most dangerous foes. Following the fall of Sevastopol, Manstein and the 11th Army were transferred north to participate in the siege of Leningrad. His task was to orchestrate the final assault to capture the city, which had been encircled for a year. However, before his offensive, codenamed Unternehmen Nordenlicht, or Operation Northern Light, could be launched, a new crisis erupted hundreds of miles to the south that would demand his immediate attention and lead to one of the most pivotal moments of the war.
The Stalingrad disaster and the backhand blow. In November 1942, the Soviet Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a massive pincer movement that encircled and trapped the entire German Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, in and around the city of Stalingrad. It was a disaster of unprecedented scale, threatening the collapse of the entire German southern front. In this moment of supreme crisis, Hitler turned to Manstein. He was appointed commander of the newly formed Army Group Don, with the seemingly impossible mission of relieving the trapped Sixth Army. Manstein hastily assembled a relief force and launched Operation Winter Storm, Unternehmen Wintergewitter, in mid-December. The 4th Panzer Army, led by the brilliant Panzer General Hermann Hoth, spearheaded the attack. In a remarkable feat of arms, Hoth's panzer divisions fought their way through blizzards and across the frozen steppe, smashing through successive Soviet defensive lines. They inflicted heavy losses on the Red Army, and for a moment it seemed a miracle was possible. Hoth's panzer spearheads reached a point just 30 miles, or about 50 kilometers from the Stalingrad pocket. The beleaguered soldiers of the Sixth Army could see the flares of their rescuers in the night sky. At this critical juncture, Manstein urged Hitler to order Paulus to attempt a breakout. He argued that the Sixth Army must launch a coordinated attack from within the pocket, codenamed Operation Thunderclap, or Donnerschlag, to link up with Hoth's relief column. This blood-and-guts breakout was their only chance for survival. Hitler, however, egged on by the boasts of Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring that he could supply the Sixth Army entirely by air, adamantly refused. He ordered Paulus to stand fast and hold Stalingrad to the last man. It was a militarily insane decision, born of political obsession and hubris. Without the breakout attempt from within, Manstein's relief effort was doomed. The Red Army, recovering from the initial shock, brought up massive reinforcements and began to hammer the exposed flanks of Hoth's panzer spearhead. With his own forces overextended and facing encirclement themselves, a heartbroken Manstein had no choice but to call off the rescue and pull his troops back. The fate of the Sixth Army was sealed. It would be annihilated over the next month, a defeat that is widely considered the primary turning point of the war on the Eastern Front. Many military analysts and historians concur that had Hitler heeded Manstein's advice and allowed the breakout, a significant portion of the Sixth Army could have been saved. The disaster at Stalingrad was not a failure of Manstein's generalship, but a direct consequence of Hitler's disastrous strategic interference. The Stalingrad catastrophe sent shockwaves through the German front, which began to crumble. As Soviet armies surged westward, it appeared that the entire German southern wing was on the verge of collapse. It was in this desperate situation that Manstein executed what is arguably his most brilliant operational masterpiece, the Third Battle of Kharkiv, also known as the Donetsk Campaign. In February 1943, as overconfident Soviet armies pushed deep into the Ukraine, their advance elements stretched their supply lines to the breaking point. Manstein, having skillfully conducted a fighting withdrawal and gathered his panzer reserves, saw his opportunity. Instead of continuing to fall back, he unleashed a stunning counteroffensive, a backhand blow. He allowed the Soviet spearheads to advance past the city of Kharkiv and then struck them with powerful, concentrated panzer thrusts in their exposed northern and southern flanks. The effect was devastating. The overextended Soviet armies were caught completely by surprise, their command and control shattered. Manstein's panzers encircled and destroyed vast Soviet formations, including elements of several tank armies. In a matter of weeks, he had not only halted the Soviet winter offensive, but had thrown them back hundreds of kilometers, stabilized the entire front, and, in a stunning reversal of fortunes, recaptured the major cities of Kharkiv and Belgorod. The Third Battle of Kharkiv was a tactical and operational victory of the highest order. Manstein's forces annihilated an estimated 52 Soviet divisions, inflicting staggering casualties. Around 46,000 Soviet soldiers were killed, and another 14,000 were taken prisoner. The Wehrmacht also captured or destroyed over 600 tanks and 1,200 artillery pieces. It was a classic example of Manstein's genius for mobile warfare, a blow that temporarily restored German fortunes in the south and sent a fresh wave of hope through the battered Wehrmacht. For this spectacular achievement, Hitler awarded him the oak leaves to his Knight's Cross.
The Citadel and the Long Retreat. The victory at Kharkov set the stage for the last major German strategic offensive on the Eastern Front, Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk, in the summer of 1943. The plan was to eliminate the large Soviet salient that jutted into the German lines around the city of Kursk, with a massive pincer attack from the north and south. Manstein was given command of the southern pincer, Army Group South. He argued for an immediate attack in the spring to capitalize on the victory at Kharkov before the Soviets could build up their defenses. However, Hitler delayed the offensive for months, waiting for the arrival of new and more powerful tanks like the Panther and the Tiger, and for the Ferdinand tank destroyer. This delay proved fatal. It gave the Red Army ample time to transform the Kursk salient into the most formidable fortified zone in military history, a dense, multi-layered network of minefields, anti-tank ditches, and deeply entrenched artillery and infantry positions. When the attack finally launched in July 1943, Manstein's southern pincer, despite facing incredibly fierce resistance, made significant progress.
His panzer divisions, particularly the elite 2 SS Panzer Corps, fought their way through the dense Soviet defenses in what became the largest tank battle in history, culminating in the titanic armored clash at Prokhorovka. In his memoirs, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the overall Soviet commander at Kursk, paid grudging respect to the tenacity and skill of Manstein's forces in the south, acknowledging the heavy losses they inflicted. Manstein himself always maintained that Kursk was on the verge of being a German tactical victory in his sector. He argued that he had drawn in and was systematically destroying the last of the Soviet strategic armored reserves and that a breakthrough was imminent. He was furious when, on July 13th, Hitler abruptly called off the offensive. The reason was the Allied invasion of Sicily, which required the transfer of key units, including the 2 SS Panzer Corps, from the Eastern Front to Italy. Manstein protested vigorously, claiming that victory was within his grasp, and to stop now would be to throw away all the gains made at such a high cost. However, Hitler remained adamant. The offensive was cancelled. While Soviet losses were indeed enormous, most military historians today dispute Manstein's claim that Germany could have achieved a decisive victory had the battle continued. The Red Army had vast strategic reserves that had not yet been committed, while the German panzer divisions had suffered irreplaceable losses in men and machines. The cancellation of Citadel marked the permanent loss of the strategic initiative for Germany on the Eastern Front. From that point on, the Wehrmacht would be locked in a long, bloody, and ultimately hopeless defensive struggle. Over the next year, Manstein conducted a series of brilliant but ultimately futile defensive battles. He commanded Army Group South during the massive battle for the Dnieper River in late 1943. He repeatedly clashed with Hitler over strategy. Manstein argued for a flexible, mobile defense, advocating for tactical withdrawals to preserve his forces, shorten the front line, and create opportunities for powerful counterattacks against overextended Soviet spearheads. A repeat of his Kharkov strategy on a larger scale. Hitler, however, had become obsessed with a rigid stand-and-fight doctrine. He forbade any retreat and ordered every inch of ground to be held to the last man. This hold-fast policy was anathema to a master of mobile warfare like Manstein. In a series of stormy meetings at Hitler's headquarters, Manstein repeatedly and openly challenged the Führer. He argued for the restoration of the professional authority of the General Staff, demanding that Hitler relinquish direct operational control of the war and grant his field commanders the freedom to conduct the war as they saw fit. One such confrontation occurred in early November 1943, when Manstein warned Hitler that the Dnieper line was untenable and that a strategic withdrawal was necessary to save his armies. His proposals were flatly rejected. Hitler trusted only his own intuition. He believed he alone possessed the will to see the war through. The breaking point came in March 1944. The Red Army had launched another massive offensive, encircling the German 1st Panzer Army near Kamenets-Podolsky. Facing a potential second Stalingrad, Manstein flew to Hitler's headquarters on March 21 and in a heated argument demanded the freedom to order a breakout. This time, after a tense standoff, a reluctant Hitler finally conceded. Manstein orchestrated a complex and successful breakout, saving the bulk of the 1st Panzer Army from annihilation. This victory, however, was his last. The constant strategic disagreements and Manstein's open defiance had eroded what little trust Hitler had left in him. On March 30, 1944, Hitler summoned Manstein to his headquarters. After awarding him the swords to his Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of Germany's highest military decorations, he relieved him of his command. Hitler told him that the era of complex operational maneuver was over, and that what was now needed was not a brilliant strategist, but commanders with brutal, fanatical resolve. Manstein's active military career was over. He was sent into retirement, to a private estate in Liegnitz, to wait out the final, agonizing collapse of the Third Reich.
Post-war life, trial, and legacy. At the end of the war, Manstein was arrested by the British. Under intense pressure from the Soviet Union, which considered him a major war criminal, he was put on trial in Hamburg in 1949. The charges against him included the mistreatment of prisoners of war and failing to protect the lives of civilians in his area of command,
particularly in relation to the activities of the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile SS death squads responsible for the mass murder of Jews and other civilians. The trial was controversial. Manstein was defended by the prominent British lawyer Reginald Paget, and many in the British establishment, including Winston Churchill and B.H. Liddell Hart, contributed to his defense fund. He was portrayed as an honorable, professional soldier who was merely following his duty, a man who had fought a valiant battle against a numerically superior and barbaric enemy, and was now being unjustly prosecuted. Ultimately, he was acquitted of many of the most serious charges, but was found guilty on 2 counts related to the use of scorched earth tactics and failing to prevent the deaths of civilians, resulting in a sentence of 18 years in prison. However, due to medical reasons and the political climate of the Cold War, where a rearmed West Germany was seen as a necessary bulwark against the Soviet Union, his sentence was commuted, and he was released on May 7, 1953, after serving only 4 years. Upon his release, Manstein's expertise was once again in demand. In the mid-1950s, he was invited to serve as an honorary advisor to the West German Ministry of Defense, playing a key role in the establishment of the new German army, the Bundeswehr. In 1955, he published his war memoirs titled Verloren Siege, Lost Victories. The book became an international bestseller and is still widely studied in military academies around the world. In it, Manstein laid out his central thesis that the German army could have won the war on the Eastern Front if only the professional military leadership, namely generals like himself, had been in charge of strategy instead of the amateurish and irrational Adolf Hitler. He meticulously detailed his campaigns, analyzed his strategic decisions, and sharply criticized Hitler's constant and disastrous interference. Lost Victories was instrumental in shaping the post-war narrative of the German army, promoting the image of a highly professional and largely apolitical Wehrmacht that fought honorably but was ultimately betrayed by a mad dictator. This narrative, often referred to as the clean Wehrmacht myth, has since been challenged by historians who have documented the extensive complicity of the army's leadership in the criminal policies of the Nazi regime. One of the most enduring anecdotes attributed to Manstein, reflecting his sharp wit and his views on leadership, concerns his classification of military officers. He is said to have remarked, "There are only 4 types of officer. First, there are the lazy, stupid ones. Leave them alone, they do no harm. Second, there are the hard-working, intelligent ones. They make excellent staff officers, ensuring that every detail is properly considered. Third, there are the hard-working, stupid ones. These people are a menace and must be shot on sight. Finally, there are the intelligent, lazy ones. They are destined for the highest command." This famous quote encapsulates his belief that the best commanders are those who are intelligent enough to see what needs to be done, but lazy enough to find the simplest and most efficient way to do it, delegating the details to their hard-working subordinates. Erich von Manstein passed away from a stroke on the night of June 9, 1973, at the age of 85. His funeral was conducted with full military honors, attended by hundreds of high-ranking Bundeswehr officers, a testament to the enduring respect he commanded as a soldier. An obituary in the British newspaper, The Times, on June 13, 1973, summarized his stature. His influence and impact came from the power of his mind and the depth of his knowledge, rather than from an ability to generate an electrical current in his troops or to impress his personality. Germany's own Der Spiegel magazine eulogized him as one of the last great strategists of the military arts, a man whose brilliance on the battlefield was tragically bound to a cause that led his nation to utter catastrophe. Erich von Manstein remains a complex and controversial figure. He was, without question, a military genius, perhaps one of the greatest operational commanders of the 20th century. His planning for the invasion of France was a work of art, and his conduct of mobile warfare on the Eastern Front, especially the backhand blow at Kharkov, is a masterclass in the operational art. Yet his genius served a monstrous regime. While he may not have been a fervent Nazi ideologue, he was a willing and highly effective instrument of its conquests. His legacy is therefore forever dual, that of the brilliant strategist whose victories were ultimately lost, and that of the German field marshal who, for all his talent, could not separate his duty from the moral abyss of the cause he served.